Well, welcome to this video. Let me introduce myself. My name's Bond, or Ron Bond, and I was born in Salford, England in November 1935. Well, why is my date of birth important? Because that's when this whole scenario starts, when I was 3 years and 9 months old. At that time, the war started, and with the war came the Blitz. Now, we all know war stories. We've seen the pictures of the fighting men overseas and the brave souls that saved our freedoms. But left behind were the civilians, the wives and mothers and children and the older folks that couldn't join in the war effort. And so these folks were then exposed to all the bombing that went on. Now, we lived in densely populated areas. Most of them were rows and rows of houses, 2 bedrooms upstairs, 2 rooms downstairs. Some luxury ones had bathrooms even. But for the most part, we had an outdoor toilet. Flush toilet, mind you, but still outdoors. So when the Blitz started, we were given the following scenario. First of all, there'd be an air raid siren, which indicated that the radar had picked up a wave of bombers coming towards the coast. After the air raid siren, where we all scurried to our shelters, you'd then hear the bombers come over. And following the bombers came the blasts when the bombs exploded all over the place. This went on for heaven knows how long. Being 4 years old, I really didn't have a clue, but it seemed to me like forever. When it was deemed that the bombing raid was over, then they would sound the all clear, which is just another siren but with a different note to let everybody know it was now safe to come out of hiding and head for what's left of their homes. I remember my mother sitting in these air raid shelters, and an air raid shelter to us was between the 2 rows of houses, back to back. They would lay concrete slabs on the walls. The walls are probably 6 feet high, and the concrete slabs went from one end to the other. And at the end of the alleyway, they would put a brick wall, halfway up, staggered, so that the blast of the bombs could not get in, harm us in the shelters. So then we will all head to our homes and see what was left. This blitzing went on for many, many times, and I can feel the angst of my mother sitting there with her 3 kids, not knowing will we ever get out of there alive or not. But anyway, we did, obviously. So one Christmas 1940 actually, we were all set for the Christmas pageant. We had the tree in the house, we had the decorations going. Then the alarm sounded, sirens coming. So we headed for the shelters. Lo and behold, a bomb exploded in the church next door to our house. It picked up an easy chair, which was overstuffed easy chair, and jammed it in a doorway that it took 3 or 4 guys to wrest it out of there. The house wasn't badly damaged, but badly enough that we moved. It's actually my mother's fish and chip shop, and we lived upstairs at that. And she just closed up the shop, and off we went. We actually went to the resort town of Blackpool. Sounded idyllic at the time, but little known to them, it was an RAF training squadron who was parked outside town. Another great initiative for the German bombers to come over, right? So we stayed in Blackpool for probably about a year. I remember going to school there very, very briefly. But then my folks moved back to Salford. And when they did, they decided it was time for me, my 2 older sisters, to be evacuated. So we joined the other 3.5 million kids that were moved from the city to the countryside. 3.5 million is an outstanding number. And for any government, me not being an advocate of big government, must bow my head to these people. They did an incredible job. To get all those people organized, parents had a choice whether the kids went or not. It was a mandatory thing at the time. So they would gather their kids together and they would have a list of stuff they were supposed to take with them, and they would all head to the railroad station. They were told where to go, which station, and so on and forth. But often the kids didn't know what town they were going to end up in. We ended up in the little town of Ulverston, and it was in the Lake District, which was a very calm area, but we stayed in two different families. The first one weren't very nice. My parents got wind of it and had us move to another people just a couple of blocks away. Much better. But life in the country was far different than the life in the city. Most of us have never seen a cow, never seen a horse, never seen a pig. Well, horses did bring the milk around and stuff in the cities, but you know, to see them running around in the field wasn't something we were exposed to. The people we lived with, Mr. and Mrs. Proctor, were very nice to us, nice as they could be, and you know, we were crowding them in their house. Their house had no electricity. The illumination at night was a gas mantle that they lit, and it lit the one room downstairs.
Wow.
Off we went to bed with candles. We'd take a candle with us up to bed. They always inspected our mouths before we went to bed in case we were smuggling chewing gum, but whoever had chewing gum anyway, right? So anyway, that was the bedtime stories. We'd all go to bed. Me and my two sisters piled into one bed, and that was it. The people were very nice to us as far as it goes. We were fairly well fed, providing that there was food available. My parents would send us packages once in a while. They'd write letters to us and we would respond to the letters. But occasionally we'd get a box come in the mail with goodies in it. Whether we got all the goodies in boxes, I'm not too sure. But I do remember that every Saturday the family members with the Proctors would go to town and in the village, the market, and pick up whatever supplies they needed. During that time, my older sister climbed up into one of the cupboards, found a box out there and pulled it down, and here, lo and behold, was a cake in there. Well, I tell you, you know, 3 pairs of hungry eyes focused on that. What was left when the folks came back from the village, I really can't say, but I know they wouldn't be very happy about it. But anyway, that was just one little thing that went on. Another thing, they were very conscious of our health. They had to keep us healthy. They don't get money for us if they don't keep us healthy. So anyway, what they would do is in the wintertime, Saturday morning, we would get a saucer with melted bacon grease in it. And we were expected to drink that down, which we did because we had to, but not a very pleasant thing.
Oh.
And I would have been in my 20s before I dared look a piece of bacon that had fat on it and not cringe, man. Yeah, so anyway, more life in the country. We had to walk to school, of course. Well, walking to school in the country was all different than walking to school in the city. In the city, it was probably more than 6 blocks. In the country, to my little 6-year-old legs, it seemed like miles. But we made it every day. A big stone school that I have pictures of when I went back there years and years later. There's about maybe 4 or 5 classrooms in the school. We had a coal fire in there to heat it during the winter. And during the winter, we were always given an allocation of milk, a little half-pint bottle to everyone. And we sit it around the fire to take the chill off it, because we weren't used to cold drinks then, having no fridges, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, also on a Saturday, I would go out with the older gentleman that lived at the house. He would take me walking in the woods. I'd never seen woods before. So walking in the woods was a treat. I remember there'd be a little stream running through it with the noise of the water running, incredible to my ears. While in the woods, we would look for birds' nests. Well, why birds' nests? Well, because if you found a robin's nest with 4 or 5 eggs in it, you could always take one and they wouldn't miss it. And we'd go from tree to tree looking for eggs, and we'd probably collect maybe a dozen during our trip. Birds' eggs, what do you do with them? Well, like chicken's eggs, you fry them up. Now, you're not going to get something much bigger than a silver dollar when you fry up a robin's egg, but it was an egg nevertheless, and you don't find them any other way. The older son of the people that we lived with had hound dogs. He had 2 of them what he kept in a cage in the backyard. Now, every Saturday morning, we would take aniseed oil, dip a rag in it, and trail it through the fields, over the stiles, over the walls, and back around in a huge big circle. Then they would bring out the hound dogs, and the hound dogs would be let loose, and with a lot of yelping and howling, they would off they go down this aniseed trail, man. They would follow it full speed ahead, and whoever came back first won. Now, being my age, I didn't know whether gambling was involved in this, but right. I'm sure there was a little bit going on, man. Yes, I'm sure, indeed. Lack of communications is what happened to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
There was no TV, there was just the radio, and probably just the BBC. And then every Saturday, you'd have to take the radio battery into town. It was like a rechargeable battery of the day. They get it recharged and get a temporary loaner from the people and bring it back. So our total communications was the newspaper and the radio. So at that age, you tend to pick up conversations just listening to adults talking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you knew what was going on. Occasional letters from my parents, but of course they wouldn't discuss their discomfort
mm-hmm.
with us. So we just got what we could pick up. What was going on in Salford at the time, I'm really not too sure. I know my parents were there. My dad, being an electrician working on the merchant ships at Manchester docks, was exempt from military service. My mother has always been a businesswoman, so I assumed she did something that type while we were away. But we really did never find out just exactly what we did. But my dad, even though he was exempt from military service, was conscripted into the air raid precaution. In that job, he was to go around at night when the blitz were on to make sure there was no light showing from anybody's windows at all. Light seeping out from a window would have been a dead giveaway to the German bombers as to where people lived. So it was very essential that these blackout precautions be followed to a T. Some towns lit bonfires up on the hills to distract the German bombers and hopefully make them think there was towns there and waste all the bombs in the soil. But anyway, other than that, I don't know what went on. But I knew that the government was active in keeping things going. They had what they call the land army. And this would be volunteers who went after work or before work or instead of work, helping the farmers bring in the crops. because the food was so essential, and they had all the farmhands, of course, were up there firing bullets at somebody else, so they were not able to look after the fields. So these women, mostly women, pitched in and got these crops to the table. Some of the news we did get from home was the fact that the Blitz was getting less frequently. The bombing raids, even though they'd gone from night bombing to day bombing, were getting less and less. But at the same time, they had developed these unmanned missiles. There was the V1 that came to us as just actually a bomb with a rocket engine on it that crashed wherever it ran out of fuel. And then there was a V2, which was actually a huge missile itself, probably 30, 40 feet long, that they were able to direct it where to land. But neither one of these things were developed enough in the game to make that big difference. They were not a game changer, in other words. Even though we were safe in the country, the aspect of us going home was something that just kept us going. To finally live with your parents again and just be home was something that you couldn't replace. No matter how kind the people were, no matter how safe it was where you were, being home with your folks was where it should be. So we eventually did get permission to go home. I went back to Salford. My sister and I, my eldest sister, by the way, had already left for Salford because she'd passed an exam enabled her to go to grammar school. So it was just my one eldest sister and myself that got home. Well, when we got home, it wasn't to the home we'd left because the home we'd left didn't exist anymore. So my parents had bought another business, a different part of Salford, and this was a convenience store type place. So this is where we went. We lived upstairs over the store. My sister shared a room, and lo and behold, I had a bedroom to myself. Never thought that would happen, but it did. And so we settled back into city life. Nobody had any more than we did, so you didn't expect to get any more. One of the biggest aspects of the time was food rationing. Not only food rationing, shoe rationing, clothes rationing, gas rationing, everything was rationed. So everybody had a ration book. Babies had them, youths had them, adults had them. And there were different colors because each age group got different priorities on stuff that was available. So my sister, who was born in 1944 after the war was over, had a baby's ration book. We had youth ration books and my parents had the adult ones. Now in our ration books were coupons for every commodity that was under ration. And every month had coupons that could be clipped out and exchanged for the goods, along with the cash of course. So candies were one of the issues in the ration book. Some months you could get 2 ounces of candy for a coupon. Other months, when it was more plentiful, you might get 4 ounces of candy. But word would go around the children's grapevine which stores would take the coupons 1 or 2 days early. Wow, that place would be swarmed with sugar-starved kids, man. And they'd be there collecting our little bags of candies, trading in our pennies, and off we would go home and have a feast. All food was rationed Fruit was rationed. Fruit when you couldn't even get it. Well, there was no point rationing if you couldn't get it. Oranges were unheard of. When I was in school, I remember somebody would come around the classroom, from classroom to classroom, with an orange. And they would come in the classroom, the teachers would say, "Anybody know what that is?" Half of us didn't. Probably never seen one, I didn't remember one. So that was the extent of food rationing. Probably people got enough to eat, but tea, just being Britain, tea was the gold star of food, man. And you could trade your tea coupons in for almost anything because the Brits got to have their tea. And another thing that was on ration that came about eventually was bananas. Now, when bananas started to come on the marketplace again, they were limited to being given to the babies. So my younger sister's green ration book enabled her to get a couple of bananas when they came available. Now, I remember when the bananas came from the store, my mother gave me one, and I was so proud of this thing, man. I headed off to school. On the way, I was accosted by another schoolmate who came from a more affluent family than me and offered me what I thought was a princely sum for this banana. But no way was it leaving my hand, man. So I went to school and showed it around the class. This was a smaller group of people than before, but still showed it around the classroom. Break time, went out at recess and ate my banana, although I did share it with a couple of my classmates. Couldn't see everybody going without a taste. And finally, the Nazi war machine was crushed. Berlin was taken, Hitler committed suicide, and the Nazis had given up every chance of ever owning Britain. So anyway, what did the Brits do? Well, we had to have a party, that's what you do. So we had street parties. They would fill the streets from one end to the other with long wooden tables on sawhorses. Sheets and tablecloths came out. Food that we didn't even know existed came out of people's stash, I guess, man, because there it was. We had jello and custard and cake and whatever made life good. The street was covered with Union Jacks, and there was bunting hung from one end to the other across the street. It was just a wonderful, warm feeling. People would bring musical instruments. We would have sing-songs and dancing, and it was just a great, joyous event to think that life was going to turn back somewhat like normal. It'll take a while, but it would get there. Following the May VE Day celebrations, a few months later, in September, the Japanese gave in. So we had a VJ Day celebration. By this mind, we knew what to do. We'd been rehearsed before, right? So we got out the tables and we got out the sheets, we got out the flags, we got out the bunting, and we had another celebration. And to top it off, as we were enjoying the party, around the corner walked a prisoner of war from Japan. One of the sons of one of our neighbors on the street had just been released, had made his way home, and here he was just in time to enjoy the party. And it was such a great time by all. After our celebrations of VE and VJ Day, life started to return somewhat to normal. Food rationing slowly eased. We got more and more per coupon, and finally, no coupons altogether. You just went and bought what was available and what you needed. Winston Churchill, who had been our leader morally and spiritually, and how can you say what a great man is was to the people of that country. He gave his all. He went through his brandy and his cigars, but he kept the spirit of that country alive. Now, unfortunately, after the war, he became up for re-election, but he was beaten at the ballot box. He was beaten by a socialist party who appealed to be people who had probably been in the military, and they'd come home from the war, and they were looking for change. And they got a change. They elected a party who took England, Britain, down the road into socialism. The Labour Party, under Prime Minister Clement Attlee, bought every trucking company in the nation. Small companies, big companies. He bought every trucking company and turned it into British Railroad. They also bought every railroad in the country. Big ones, small ones. They bought them all and turned it into British Railroad. What else they nationalized, I don't know. I think they did the coal mines too, but other than that, I'm not too sure. But what I do know is that years and years later, all these government-controlled enterprises went back to private ownership where they were efficient and profitable. And efficient is the word. So I look back upon this evacuation experience, the whole wartime experience, as something that molded me, I suppose, subconsciously because of my age, but not consciously molded me. But you pick up things during this. Subliminally, you get it coming into your mind. But I know one thing, the government did one awesome job of getting 3.5 million kids out of the cities. That could have been a whole generation decimated by bombing, but we were still around to carry on. The war and the evacuation did prepare us for, whether subliminally or because it was more conscious, was change. Everything changed. Everything changed after that day in September 1939. And what it has to do with change is that we have to be prepared for it. Life changes every day, and we can't stop it. So God bless everybody, and be prepared for change. In front of me, you can see 3 books. The first one, No Time to Wave Goodbye, is the initial take on the evacuation. Then it was a follow-up with The Day They Took the Children. This one is basically a lot of stories that people have written to people that were evacuated, the kids went through it. And it's in the book, little stories are in the book. And the third book, Nell's War. Nell was Ben Wick's mother, Ben Wicks being the author of all these books. It's about his mother who lived in London, London being far, far subject to worse bombing than we ever experienced. And that woman, in all her age, never missed a day's work. She was a cleaning lady, but she never missed a day of going into that bank and cleaning those offices like there was no war at all. Such was the spirit of the Brits of the day. Whether it still exists, I don't know, and all I can say as a Brit is I hope so.